The drive to the nearest military installation, a small airfield about 90 miles to the east, took nearly 3 hours across rough desert terrain. No one spoke much during that journey. People were too shocked, too focused on processing what they just experienced. Some prayed, others simply stared out the windows at the dark desert rolling past, half expecting to see more of those things emerging from the sand. When they finally reached the airfield, Colonel Henley immediately placed an emergency call to regional command. What happened in that conversation remains classified, but the results were visible within hours. By dawn, military helicopters were arriving at the airfield, and personnel from Carthage were being separated for individual debriefings. By mid-morning, they'd been transferred to different locations, some to medical facilities, others to secure debriefing centers. Everyone was required to sign extensive non-disclosure agreements. The message was clear. What happened at Carthage stayed at Carthage. Officially, it hadn't happened at all. And what of the base itself? A reconnaissance flight was launched on January 2nd, 48 hours after the evacuation. The pilots reported that forward Operating Base Carthage no longer existed in any meaningful sense. The buildings had been systematically demolished, reduced to scattered debris. The vehicles that had been left behind were torn apart, their metal frames twisted like aluminum foil. The communications tower had been pulled down. Even the perimeter fence was gone, uprooted from the ground and scattered across the desert. The entire facility looked as if it had been subjected to a sustained and thorough campaign of destruction. But there was no sign of what had caused it. No tracks, no evidence of the emerged things, no holes in the ground where they'd climbed out. The desert floor around the former base was undisturbed, showing no indication that anything unusual had ever occurred there. It was as if the things had simply vanished back into the earth, leaving no trace of their existence except the ruins they'd created. The military's response was swift and absolute. The site was declared permanently off-limits, designated as a contaminated area, though no specific contaminant was ever named. A new perimeter was established miles away, and any access to the region required multiple levels of authorization that were almost never granted. In the months following the incident, the official story evolved. Forward Operating Base Carthage had been decommissioned as part of routine base closure procedures, the story went. The buildings were demolished and the equipment removed. Just another Cold War relic being retired as the geopolitical landscape shifted. The 20 people who had been there that New Year's Eve were scattered to different assignments around the world, ensuring they'd have no opportunity to compare notes or build a collective narrative. Some left the military soon after, taking early retirements or simply not re-enlisting when their terms of service ended. Others stayed in, but never spoke of what they'd witnessed, honoring their non-disclosure agreements, or perhaps simply trying to forget. But stories have a way of surviving, even when official channels try to bury them. Over the years, fragments of what happened at Carthage began to surface in the places where military personnel gather and talk. In the bars near military bases, in the online forums where veterans swap stories, in the quiet conversations that happen late at night when old soldiers get together and the alcohol loosens tongues. The details varied from telling to telling. That's the nature of oral tradition, but the core remained consistent. There was a base. Something came up from underground. Everyone evacuated. The base was destroyed, and whatever it was that emerged that night, it was never explained. Theories, of course, proliferated. Some believed Carthage had been built atop some kind of secret underground installation, and what emerged were failed experiments or escaped test subjects. Others thought the base had inadvertently been positioned above the dwelling place of something ancient, something that had lived beneath the earth long before humans ever arrived, and that the seismic monitoring equipment had somehow disturbed or awakened it. There were whispers about extraterrestrial origins, about creatures from another dimension, about government projects that had gone catastrophically wrong. The truth is that no one knows. Or if someone does know, if there are classified reports sitting in some vault deep within the Pentagon or buried in the archives of some three-letter agency, they've kept that knowledge locked away for nearly 40 years. What we're left with is the story itself, the testimony of 20 people who experienced something that shouldn't have been possible, who watched their base being systematically destroyed by things that emerged from beneath the desert floor, things that defied every category humanity uses to make sense of the world. Whether those things were biological or mechanical, terrestrial or otherwise, natural or artificial, remains an open question. All we can say with certainty is that on the night of December 31st, 1987, something happened at a remote military installation in the American Southwest. Something that scared the United States military badly enough to evacuate a functioning base in the middle of the night and then spend the next 40 years ensuring that almost no one would ever hear about it. Sergeant David Reeves, who saw that first impossible figure standing beyond the fence line on December 18th, retired from the Army in 1992. He moved to a small town in Montana, as far from the desert as he could get, and rarely spoke about his military service. But in 2003, shortly before his death from cancer, he gave one final interview to a researcher interested in unusual military incidents. Most of what he said simply reiterated the official story about Carthage being decommissioned. But near the end of the interview, the researcher asked him if he'd ever seen anything during his service that he couldn't explain. Reeves was quiet for a long time. Then he said something that the researcher would remember for years afterwards. "I learned something in the desert," Reeves said. "I learned that the world is bigger and stranger than any of us want to believe. We build our bases and our cities, we plant our flags and draw our maps, and we think that means we understand what we're dealing with. We think the world is ours because we can measure it and name it. But underneath it all, there are things that don't care about our measurements or our names, things that were here long before us and will be here long after we're gone. And sometimes, if we dig in the wrong place or make too much noise in the quiet places, those things remind us exactly how small we really are." The researcher asked him what he meant by that. What had he seen at Carthage? But Reeves just shook his head. "I signed papers, made promises, and even if I hadn't, even if I could tell you everything, I don't think you'd believe me. I'm not sure I believe it anymore. The mind does funny things with memories, especially the ones that don't make sense. Maybe we all just had some kind of shared hallucination out there in the desert. Mass hysteria, they call it. That's probably what it was." But the look in his eyes when he said it suggested he didn't believe that at all. Today, if you know where to look and you have the right clearances, you can find the location that used to be Forward Operating Base Carthage on military maps. It's marked as a former installation and designated as off-limits due to environmental concerns. The specifics of those environmental concerns are never elaborated upon. The land sits empty, slowly being reclaimed by the desert, the scattered debris of demolished buildings gradually being buried by wind-blown sand.